Okay, so the book I chose was Hip Hip Hooray for Annie McRae. I'm going to read it. The reason why I like this book, it reminds me of Nana or Mom, because when I was little, I remember I was first grade and I was really nervous to go to first grade / kindergarten. And I remember, Mom, you gave me this book, or we had this book and we read it. And I remember one time I read it at family home evening at Grandma's house and I cried because I was just an emotional kid. But I think Dad was also either in Vegas or Ohio, but I just remember you growing up would always tell me that phrase, hip hip hooray. So this book reminds me of you, so I'm gonna read it. Okay, should we read it? Okay, let's read it. Oh, I'm gonna show you Hip Hip Hooray for Annie McRae. And then I'm gonna show the camera. Those are boots. Howdy, Mom, called 8-year-old Annie McRae as she threw off her covers and jumped out of bed. Howdy, Chestnut, she said to her stuffed horse. Mom smiled from the doorway while Annie carried Chestnut to his favorite spot by the window so she could make her bed. I love the way you take care of your room, said Mom. Hip hip hooray for Annie McRae. That put an extra spring in Annie's steps as she dressed up and danced her way to the kitchen, clicking together the heels of her turquoise blue cowboy boots every few steps. Howdy, Dad, Annie belted out as she searched through the cereal boxes to find her favorite. Good morning, Dad smiled over the wall of boxes Annie was building on the counter. What kind of day is it going to be? He asked playfully. All the cereal. Okay, look what's next. It's going to be a rip-roaring, corn-cracking day, Annie responded. She poured herself a bowl of cereal and didn't spill a drop of milk. I love the way you're so careful, said Dad, and then he cheered as he always did. Hip hip hooray for Annie McRae. That put an extra sparkle in Annie's smile as she grabbed her backpack and twirled out the door on her way to school. Is she gonna go to school? Howdy, Mr. Garcia, Annie shouted as she bounded through the doorway of room 14. May I hold the pointer during Big Book today? Absolutely. I love the way you volunteer, said Mr. Garcia, and then he cheered as he always did. Hip hip hooray for Annie McRae. That put an extra zing in Annie's swing as she sashayed her way to the closet to hang up her backpack. Some big words. Howdy, Grandma C, Annie whooped as she arrived home from school and sat down at the piano. I hope you're in the mood for a concert. Annie slid forward on the edge of the bench so her boot could reach the loud pedal. I love the way you practice the piano without even being asked, said Grandma C, and then she cheered as she always did. Hip hip hooray for Annie McRae. That put an extra forte in Annie's fingers as her hands do-si-doed across the keyboard. It's her with her grandma. And that's about how things went every day until one morning when Annie woke up, moved Chestnut to the window, made her bed, hollered, howdy, Mom, but Mom was in the shower and didn't say a word. Annie put on her turquoise blue cowboy boots, but she didn't click her heels. Is she sad? Yeah. She's feeling sad. In the kitchen, Annie crunched her last bit of cereal and put away the milk without spilling. Howdy, Dad, she called. But Dad was working at the computer and didn't say a word. Annie tried again. I think it's going to be a trailblazing, whip-snapping day. But Dad didn't say a word. Annie kicked the screen door open with her boot and slumped off to elementary school. Oh.
The baby.
Yeah, there's a baby back there. Howdy, Mr. Garcia, Annie yelled. May I do the snap and clap during word wall? But Mr. Garcia was meeting with Whitney's mom and didn't say a word. Annie dragged her boots across the floor and slouched toward the closet. She's feeling sad still. Howdy, Grandma C, Annie bellowed. Yeah, she's feeling sad. Annie bellowed after school as she sank down on the piano bench and banged the keys. But Grandma C was taking a nap. She didn't say a word. No one cheered hip hip hooray for Annie McRae the whole mixed up day. Annie drooped outside to the back porch swing, kicked off her turquoise blue boots, hugged her knees, and cried till her nose ran. She's crying. following morning, Annie made her bed as usual and looked around the room for her mom. And when she didn't see her, Annie picked up Chestnut, moved her mouth open and closed while she cheered to herself, "Hip, hip, hooray for Annie McRae." Then she put on her turquoise blue boots and clicked her heels. Now she's happy. At breakfast, Dad had already left for work, but Annie was still careful. As she put the milk away in the fridge, she made a deep voice like her father's and cheered, "Hip, hip, hooray for Annie McRae." That put an extra hip in Annie's hop as she headed off to school. Wow, almost done. Mr. Garcia was gone to a workshop, but Annie still volunteered to help in class. Inside her mind, she cheered, "Hip, hip, hooray for Annie McRae." That put an extra zip in Annie's skip as she hurried home, clicking her heels together every few steps. "Howdy, Grandma C," Annie called as she sat down to practice the piano, but Grandma C didn't have her hearing aids on, so Annie just smiled to herself. She didn't need Grandma C to cheer for her. She didn't need Mom or Dad or Mr. Garcia to cheer for her either. The only one who needed to cheer for Annie was Annie. And with that, she threw back her head and hollered, "Hip, hip, hooray for Annie McRae." "What?" asked Grandma C. "What's that you say?" "Oh, nothing," shouted Annie. "Grandma, how was your day?" She's hugging her grandma. It's a good book. Love you.